Shalom Aleichem. My name is Tony Pino, and today we are continuing in our series concerning the overview of the book of Acts. Today we are doing chapter 21, and today we are continuing in Paul's third missionary journey as he heads to Yerushalayim. We are looking for the biblical truths within its context, within its historical setting and language, and we know when we find these truths, we can apply them to any generation. Amen. So come with me now as we go to Acts chapter 21 to see what's up with Paul as he heads to Yerushalayim. All right, before going to the scriptures, I just wanted to show you again this map here of Paul's third missionary journey. In this chapter, we're going to see him pass Cyprus here. On his way to Yerushalayim, he's going to go ahead and get to Tyre and then over to Caesarea and then off to Yerushalayim. Remember that the Ruach HaKodesh is sending him. Okay, a lot of people are scared for him to go. And even he doesn't know really what's going to happen to him, but he's willing to give his life if necessary. He just knows he's got to get there, and he's trying to get there, of course, before Shavuot. So let's go ahead and head to the scriptures. All right, so here we are in Acts chapter 21. And I just want to state that we are in the late 50s now, CE, somewhere around 58, 59 CE. So we are definitely well over 25 years or so after the resurrection of Yeshua. Okay, just want to kind of give you a time frame here. Now, in verse 1, we see, after tearing ourselves away from them and setting sail, we set a straight course to Kos, the next day to Rhodes, and from there to Patara. Finding a ship crossing to Phoenicia, we went aboard and set sail. When we came in sight of Cyprus, passing it by on the left, we kept sailing to Syria and landed at Tyre. For there the ship was to unload the cargo. We looked up the disciples and stayed there 7 days. They kept telling Paul through the Ruach not to set foot in Yerushalayim, but Paul is not going to listen, right? We see him going, of course, up through Tyre, and he meets up with some people there in Caesarea. He came to the home of Philip, a proclaimer of the good news, who was one of the seven, and we stayed with him. Now, this man had 4 virgin daughters who prophesied, amen. And then we see in verse 10, while we stayed there for a number of days, a prophet named Agabus came from Judea. He came to us, took Paul's belt, tied his own hands and feet, and said, the Ruach HaKodesh says this, in this way shall the Jewish people in Yerushalayim bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles. All right, so notice it doesn't say he's going to lose his life or anything. Paul just does not know. But the prophecy is going to reign true. Amen. So, of course, people are going to urge him not to go, but he says, for I am ready not only to be bound, but to die for the name of the Lord Yeshua. Amen. So he heads to Yerushalayim and he arrives there. He talks to the elders. He talks to Yaakov, giving praise of what Yahweh has been doing on his journey with all the Gentiles that are coming into the kingdom. Amen. And so they also respond by telling Shaul, Paul, they said, you see, brother, how many myriads, right? Tens of thousands there are among the Jewish people who have believed, and they all are zealous for the Torah. In other words, the message of Yeshua, the message that he is the king of Israel, all right, still falls in line with keeping Torah. Okay, there is no nailing Torah to the cross or anything. That message is not there within the body of believers of Yeshua. It's not there. It was never preached by Yeshua. And so they do say, though, verse 21, they have been told about you that you teach all the Jewish people among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or to walk according to the customs. What's to be done then? No doubt they will hear that you have come. Well, we know that that is false, that is gossip. They didn't understand that what Paul preaches is what? It's not Jewish law, it's the Torah. Okay, and so he can show the discernment between the two when Jewish law crosses the line, all right, and goes contradictory to the Torah. And they know that they've all decided since Acts 15 that the Gentiles are not to be circumcised for salvation. because that was never part of the Torah to begin with. And so, yes, there's a great confusion on what Paul is doing, because for centuries they have what? Mixed oral law with Torah as one. And Yeshua showed them the proper way. So is the Ruach HaKodesh. You can't just mix them all as one. Torah is higher than oral law. And so they are learning that. Many people are hearing this for the first time. And so, no, you don't have to circumcise the Gentiles for salvation. Paul knows this. He is a lawyer. He knows how to divide the two. Amen. So what are they going to ask him to do to prove that he is still a Torah observant Jew? Verse 23. So do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have a vow on themselves. Take them and purify yourselves along with them and pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads. That way, all will realize there is nothing to the things they have been told about you, but that you yourself walk in an orderly manner, keeping the Torah. Amen. So he keeps the Torah correctly, which means what? He's teaching the Gentiles to keep Torah, because the Torah, all right, you can't bring Gentiles in and tell them to disobey the Torah. All right, that makes you a false teacher or a false prophet, according to Deuteronomy chapter 13. So in no way can Paul say all this. As a matter of fact, if the Torah was nailed to the cross, then Paul would be proclaiming it right now. Hey, you guys need to, get this right. You don't need to follow the Torah. You don't need to circumcise your children. You don't need to keep Torah. But no, that's not what he does. He upholds the Torah. Amen. And so it says here that in verse 23, because he is to take on a vow with these other men, this will prove to them that they walk in an orderly manner after the Torah. Amen. Everyone will know, because he'll have a shaved head. They'll know he keeps the Torah. Okay. Then it says, as for the Gentiles who have believed, however, we have written by letter what we have decided for them to abstain from what is offered to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and from immorality. So they have again repeated what they did in Acts 15. And that is, hey, when Gentiles get saved, they don't have to be circumcised, right? But what they do is they need to leave their idolatry immediately. Okay. They can't drink blood, eat blood. They can't do sexual immorality. This is all pertaining to temple worship, idolatry. Amen. They can't bring that into the Jewish community. All right. And then, of course, we saw in Acts 15 that they will learn the rest in the synagogues when they go and hear the law of Moses spoken. So this verse 25 is talking about salvation, entering into the kingdom. Okay. But after they enter the kingdom, how do they follow the ways of Yeshua? They follow the Torah. Okay. Now they have the Torah being written on their hearts, as it says in Jeremiah 31, verses 30 through 34. So yes, we are to keep the Torah. So what does Paul do? He purifies himself and he follows the whole procedure, showing everybody that he is a follower of Torah. Now, some men are going to still stir things up. They're going to shout, he's not a follower of Torah. He's teaching people, all right, to disobey the Torah. He's even got Greeks coming into the temple, amen, defiling the temple area, okay? There's a lot to talk about that, but that is oral law, okay? The Gentiles were only allowed to go so far. If they went any farther, then they could be killed, okay? But that's oral law, okay? As long as the Gentiles didn't enter into where the offerings were being done, they were fine. But of course, oral law had it a lot stricter and had them not being able to go to other places, okay? And so we have to be very careful to understand oral law versus the Torah. There's a big difference, which is why you have to study the Tanakh. Amen. So their accusations are wrong, but they end up getting Paul arrested. He ends up also getting handed over to what? Gentiles, okay? Centurions there come and they arrest him, all right? The Jews were beating Paul at the time, but the Gentile centurions here are going to have to straighten things out, okay? Paul is going to be able to talk to the commander. The commander is going to say, hey, you know Greek. The commander is going to realize he's not who he thought Paul was. All right. And so Paul is able to tell the commander that he is a Jewish man from Tarsus. Okay. And so he begs him to be able to speak to the people. The commander is going to give him permission to speak. So next week together, we're going to see exactly what Paul says to the people, because Paul is a Roman citizen and he is a citizen of Israel. And so he will straighten out the matter. But yes, you're going to have people lie about Paul all the time. But Paul was a Torah observant Jew. Not only was he a Torah observant Jew, but according to Acts 15 and according to everything we see about Paul, he teaches the Gentiles to keep the Torah, not necessarily oral law. So much of what we hear today is a misunderstanding of Paul, that he so-called claim we don't have to keep the Torah anymore. It's false. Okay. When we put Paul in his proper context and when we read him in his proper historical setting, Paul teaches the Gentiles to keep the Torah. Amen. And so, yes, there's much to talk about when it comes to that subject. But as we can see, it's been over 25 years and Paul is still teaching everyone to follow Yeshua, that it's salvation by grace into the kingdom. But once you're in the kingdom, as Yeshua said, if you love me, you will obey my commandments. And that is the Torah. Paul will not cross that line. Amen. He will teach people to keep the Torah. And so next time we were going to see what Paul says to the crowd. And so I hope you're enjoying the series. And until we meet again, everyone, shalom.